So welcome, welcome all you people that I can't see. Uh, the reason for putting this together was both Oscar and I and our team has been intimately involved with a lot of the things going on sort of behind the scenes with the recent announcement this week about, well, it's the joint statement made by the FBI and CISA. For people who don't know what CISA is, it's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. We've been going solid, I think, with things related at least to this story, not necessarily related to, indicators of compromise or TTPs and things like that, but intimately involved since I would say at least Friday night. Is that about right, Oscar?
Yeah.
Friday night at 10:30 p.m. was the first kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, that's correct. Been tracking since Friday 10:30. I think is when the first one we were aware of started kicking off. We did have some events in the preceding weeks had some similar tactics, but I could say things went to full throttle Friday night.
Right. Well, and you and I've been in constant communication. I've been tackling things from one angle. And so people who don't know us too, by the way, Oscar, leads our technical services team, including incident response. And I mean, I brag about you guys all the time. And I think everybody brags about their kids, but I feel not like you're my kids, but it's kind of the same sort of love, man. Everybody says, but I mean, truly, man, I'm so impressed with the work that you guys have done. I've been in this industry for 30 some odd years, and I know crap when I see crap, and just, it's awesome to march along this path with you. So Oscar leads that team. I'm the CEO of FRSecure, founded that in 2008. Our mission is nuts, right? It's to fix the broken industry. And that means that essentially we do things for the right reasons. Right. Our reason in this case, the right reason is to protect people. It's not to make a name for yourself. It's not to get famous. It's not to make a ton of money. It's to protect people. When you're talking about healthcare, people's lives are at stake, and we take it, even more serious, right? Than, maybe we'd see something in financial services or something like that.
Yeah.
So we've had these great conversations all week. We've talked about, the things that you're seeing on the ground, the things that I'm seeing from the people that I'm talking to, whether it be at Homeland Security or others, and we'll get into some of that. And I thought it would be a good idea for you and I just to have a candid conversation. Everybody can, everybody who's watching can be a fly on the wall. You can certainly ask questions in the chat. We are watching the chat, so we'll try to answer as many of those as we can. But that's the purpose, right? Let's try to cut through as much of I can't swear here, but as much of the BS as we can, and give people the real, the malarkey. There you go. Yeah, that's good timing on that. So what we know about, let's start with, we've got sort of an agenda. Let's start with what we know about the joint statement that was made by the FBI and CISA. For people who haven't seen it, I can put the link in the chat, the specific link that I'm talking about. But what do we know? We've both read it. We know it. We know more than I think what's there too. But let's start with what we know about this.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. Obviously the big thing that hit both of us when we first learned about this route was that number, and we've seen 427 somewhere, 428 somewhere. And that's a question too.
Yeah, is that that public anywhere? Have you seen that publicly anywhere?
I've seen over 400 in a few places, and it's funny. Our first question popped in here, and it's about the 400. I haven't seen it defined anywhere else other than some of our.
Uh-oh. Is Oscar being?
Intel has a hard number of 427 or 428. Yeah.
Oscar, you were frozen for a moment.
All right. Sorry. I can still hear you guys.
Are the Russians onto us?
Probably.
We should have done the signal or something. All right. So go ahead and go back to the 400 something.
Yeah. So
tell me what you know.
Yeah, most of the publications I've seen have estimated over 400. We did see some intel before. There was a hard number to find, and we've seen two different numbers. One was 427, 428. Seems to be like different information depending on where you find your information right now, which does kind of lead me down the path I'm sure this conversation is going to go. There's a lot that we don't know. And that's kind of, I would think, Evan, been our mission this week is, really to focus on figuring out the stuff we don't know. And there's a whole lot right now. There's a lot that we do know, but it's those things that we don't know that's been keeping me up all night since we learned about this last week, and probably the same for you. And I'd say a lot of people here listening to us today as well.
Now, was there anything in the announcement that you saw that seemed misleading, seemed inaccurate, that we disagreed with?
Yeah, I could see there was a lot of things there, right? I do see, depending on the reports you read, even with some of the intel we have, some of the intel Mandian shared, some of the intel CISA put out, like they're talking about.
Oh, poor Oscar. He froze.
About the payloads and toolkits a little bit differently. Let me know.
I think you froze again, man.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it is what it is, man. This is what happens when you put together a webinar last minute.
Yeah, for sure.
No, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
Who's your ISP? Let's go after them.
Yeah, I don't want to say that right now. Yeah.
All right, another topic for another day. Well, and from what I saw, it was good information. Now, it wasn't until this point when I think there was really, something solid that we could see and reference, in terms of indicators of compromise and sort of in terms of, tactics, TTPs. The frustrating part was this didn't come out until the 28th. It was revised on the 29th. So it came out on Wednesday. It was revised on yesterday. And I didn't see anything that's not accurate. It, based on the stuff that we've seen and based on the stuff that we've worked on. So I'll tell you how we got to this number, 427. We're very transparent, believe in transparency. We're an incident response team who really loves to share, the things we know about incidents. Certainly not things that, would tip anybody off to, who it is we're working with, or, certainly not any confidential information. But in terms of IOCs, and when we talk about IOCs, it's for people, that's indicators of compromise. It's things like command and control IP addresses, domain names, file location, file names, tactics, tools that might be used, hash values. Those are all things that are indicators of compromise that we can freely share with others, right? I mean, Obviously you vet those things.
Yeah, 100%. We vet them as best we can. And, like we've talked about so many times before, I think sharing in our communities between researchers is critically important. I mean, that's how we can eventually get to a point where we can stay ahead, is by being transparent with each other, not trying to hold those things tight to the vest, because, I was explaining it to some folks before, it's like, if a criminal has broken into your facility and you've got their fingerprints, and I think that criminal's, perusing my neighborhood and he breaks into other places there as well. If we have those fingerprints as well to identify, we can say it's the same criminal, right? We can take those fingerprints, identify who the person is, what they look like, where they live, their tactics they use, and then be able to defend ourselves against it. The same applies for cybersecurity. And so that's what an IOC is, an indicator of compromise. What techniques do they use, what tools they use, what processes they use, and so on. What IPs do they come from? What domains do they use? All those good things. Where do they like to stash their files? What files do they like to go over after? What's their MO? What do they do with your data? Are they stealing it? Are they extorting you later? Are they trustworthy? Are they not? Those are all things that's really important that we just give to our community. And we're big on that. And we're big on collaborating with other people as well. And I think that's probably, how we were able to get here anyway in the beginning is through that collaboration and doing our due diligence.
Right. And so I'll give you kind of the series of events. So this will explain to, the audience how we got to the number 427 or 28. It was two different numbers and two different conversations. It started at, Friday at 10:30 p.m. That's when one of our clients was started experiencing outages and things related to ransomware. It was about 2 a.m. that Saturday morning when we got the first call. And I'm not going to go into whether that was the right thing to do or not, or there were things there that we can improve on for sure. So we're on site with the client, which doesn't happen often because a lot of remote, we do work all over the country, but it just so happened that we could send somebody on site. So we sent somebody on site to sort of help coordinate, the conversations. At the time we got on site, the FBI was there, this DHS was there, a county sheriff was there. It was just, there was a lot of things that needed to be sort of figured out. It was kind of a cluster. So in that conversation, we started talking about who else might be affected by this, meaning what connections do we have? Is it possible for the ransomware to, cross the wire into other environments? That's just part of standard sort of containment talk. In that discussion, we discovered that, there is the potential. And again, a lot of times, one of the things that people do with incident response, which is really frustrating, is they go off of assumptions. You assume that that this is what's happening. One of the things you almost always get wrong is assuming the intention of the attacker, right? Like, what it is they're trying to do. That leads you down all kinds of paths. So use the facts, use the data to take you down the path. And in that, we discover that another client could be affected by this one ransomware attack that happened, on Friday, Saturday. So that led us to a threat hunting exercise, right? Threat hunting, all we're doing is looking for similarities, looking for something unusual, looking for indicators of compromise, looking for something weird in this environment that we need to get ahead of before they experience something potentially similar. So in that conversation, and as you guys, your team, you guys are the hands on the keyboard, right? I'm a guy who often doesn't get involved in incident response anymore. But in that conversation, we get a phone call from Brian Krebs, right? Yep. It's not every day. We do dozens and dozens of incident responses all the time, and we don't get phone calls from Brian Krebs. Right?
Yeah, right.
And Brian and I have a history, and I'm not going to go into that either. So we get on the phone with Brian Krebs, and I think it's about this time when we heard the 427. Is that right?
Yeah. That's right so far.
Okay. So we hear the 427, and that raises all kinds of alarms. And I think that was the time when you reached out to me, because the team was off threat hunting. There really was no involvement. We had no indication that something bigger, that this was something, outside of just what we see. Mm-hmm. So you contacted me. We got Brian Krebs on the phone. We started talking about what information do you have to lead us to, one, is your 427 number legit or is it BS? Mm-hmm. Do you have a list of potential clients that we need to reach out to and get on the horn right away? We're talking healthcare. We're not talking, like I said, banks. It sucks to lose money, but it's not direct, safety issues.
Yep.
And then, so we got on the phone with Brian Krebs, find out, I think it was more of a phishing exercise than anything else on his part. I think he was looking for information as opposed to providing any, which got very, very frustrating for me because, again, this is something we need to collaborate on. If it truly is a 427 or 428, we got to move. And so, tinfoil hat or not, I take this information to other channels that I, use. And one of those led me to Alex Holden, who's announced in part of, part of the maybe not the announcement, but certainly in the news. Alex Holden is being the source of potentially the 427 number. And rumor has it, that's the thing with incident responses. And when you do things like this, there's so much rumor. So how do you cut through the rumor and get to the facts? Because at the end of the day, the facts are going to lead you to what we're going to do. Rumor leads to panic. Rumor leads to fear. Rumor leads to all kinds of other stuff that leads you to make bad decisions and maybe cause more damage than good. So, we go down that path and find out, is this anything more than somebody, Alex Holden, in a forum who comes across a communication on the dark web between two attackers that say they're going to attack 427 hospitals this week.
All right.
And the frustrating thing about for where we're at right now, I haven't seen any hard data to lead me to believe that it's anything more than that.
Right. That there's a collaborated effort. There's a real plan. We've seen chatter, right? We've seen that chatter. The other thing that was real concerning to me about something we learned early on, if you recall too, was there was a hard date associated with that threat. You can call it a threat, right? Mm-hmm. And the hard date was, this begins on a certain date. That date's behind us now. And that date was a little interesting to me because, well, it had already started. I've seen organizations affected by this before that, and we've seen no pattern to indicate so far that when that date hit, that our adversary threatened or communicated this was going to start. It was like we were led to believe it was going to be a collaborative effort, all systems go, focusing on these entities at the same time. We haven't seen that. We have seen a lot of entities, affected right now that continue to be affected. And I think we'll talk about those patterns and stuff a little bit more here, but staying on the topic of, trying to find the truth, which is the most important to us. And it's because I know there's a lot of people here listening to us that are probably on here because, they are afraid. Maybe they are a little panicked right now because it is alarming. And so I think our obligation is to try to understand here what's real, what's not real. So we can get to that point, so we can give you guys that good data, the things we know that are real, so you can start applying those and, really having a good process and not panicking like Evan thought. We talked about before, if we panic, we make poor decisions. So we want to try to figure out the facts, share those facts with you guys and continue to do that so you don't have to panic. So you know what's happening, so you have the facts and understand those techniques and be ready for these things.
Well, and that's, I alluded to the fact that, sometimes we make the mistake of assuming that we know the attacker's motivation. Mm-hmm. And for all we know, the attacker's motivation was for us to cause panic, waste a bunch of time, waste a bunch of resources, and make an announcement that maybe is all vapor. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I like to operate on facts. So, Brad White asked a question in the chat. If your organization was part of the list, would you have been contacted by the FBI or somebody else? Maybe. I don't know, specifically what the protocol is for that. I'm almost, 90% convinced that the list doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'm on board. I don't think the list exists or has been obtained if it does exist today. And I'm thinking more that list could pertain to some researchers who may have been able to obtain artifacts related to businesses that could have been leaked at some point, like past breaches, past partner breaches, things like that. So I think that number, I'm not sure we've seen anything to warrant that number is real and that there is a real list behind that number either. Right. Yeah.
Well, and we'll get to one of the things I think that's really broken in just our country's ability to respond to incidents like this. Because we know what we know, we see what we see, we have our little corner of the world, right? We've got 5 or so incidents going on at any given time. Well, there's 6 million companies in the United States. There's 330 million people in the United States. There are thousands of other incident responders who are out working actively on incidents, and we don't share information well. I don't know what's going on in Florida right now with any of their ransomware attacks. If they share, great. The avenue that they're sharing is not an avenue that everybody else is using. So we've got all the repositories of information going. ISAC was supposed to do something with this. I think that function is broken, but I don't want to get I don't want to start preaching on that either.
Yep.
All right. So our involvement from there is, I'm trying to figure out this 427, 428. You're also doing the same thing. At the same time, you're trying to lead the team to respond to what's currently in front of them, right? Which is
Yep.
threatening, incident response. We're all running all week. One of the avenues that, I felt compelled to go down is, what does the government know?
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys know? Are you seeing anything? You're supposed to be this kind of central, response thing,
Mm-hmm.
unit. So I went to CISA, I went to the Department of Homeland Security. That went up the food chain, a couple of conversations here and there. Was also using some back channel stuff. I think DDS was, probably pinged at some point in all this. DDS is like the SWAT team for, the U.S. government. If they know about it and they're on it, then okay, cool. But still information, no information. It seemed like a lot of times when you're reaching out and contacting people that they're like, say what?
Yeah.
You have what? Based on what? And I'm like, I have nothing based on any facts. Somebody told me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same thing. When I hit up my law enforcement contacts, they were, what? Give me what you got, because we want it. And, that to me is the flip side. If this is a real legitimate threat, and if it is, still, got to find a way that we can make sure that our government, those entities, are tied into this real threat intel. That's a huge, huge problem that I want to figure out how we fix by, increasing this collaborative effort between our community, sharing that intel and making sure it gets to the right people too on the other side. And they know how to ingest that data and they know what to do with that data,
Right. And so what do we know to be facts? So, thankfully Wednesday was the first time I saw any concrete sort of IOCs. Because there's a lot of this stuff you'd already seen in other places, right? I mean, it's Ryuk and okay. It's UNC 1870, UNC or NC 1878, whatever you want to call them, is the kind of the group behind it. It was good information to have, and it was nice to see that the word was out, because then we could start talking about it freely. At this point, we don't want to cause any panic. At this point, we have nothing concrete. We have nothing to go to all of our clients and say, hey, check this out, beyond what you've already heard.
Right.
Back your stuff up, protect your backups. You know what I mean? Be on the lookout. That's stuff you've already heard. That's not going to get anybody's attention. So they released that, and then we compared our IOCs, the IOCs that we've seen in our, like you said, the fingerprints, the fingerprint of our attacker. Let's compare the fingerprint of this attacker, and do they match?
Mm-hmm.
The troubling thing here was some of it matched, some of it clearly didn't match. So that leads you down a whole nother path. Why don't they match? Is it two different individuals, different gangs? The things that do match, is that a tie together between some sort of coordination between multiple groups?
Yep.
Lots of speculation at this point. And again, your hands are sort of tied, because where do we get this information?
Yep. I want to answer a question too. I seen came in real quick. I think it's important, if that's cool here. I won't deviate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I see, John, you mentioned that the FBI did have a list of entities impacted. And let's be clear here too. We're not saying that the FBI doesn't have intel and they don't use that intel well. We have other organizations we work with, sure, that were contacted the same way your organization or other organizations may have been. Our context is typically around this imminent threat story right now, and knowing that they didn't have context on the imminent threat, it wasn't being tracked by them. Essentially, when Evan and I were tracking this, Brian Krebs was tracking this, and other people were at that time. That changed as our week went on. I think that's what we're talking about. So just want to make sure we kind of set the stage there and understand. We know they are tracking ransom attackers. The bigger story is here, this imminent attack targeting 427 that wasn't on their radar at the time. I think later they've been able to historically apply some knowledge as they learned about that to try to corroborate that. But yeah, just wanted to make sure you got an answer on that.
Yeah, good answer. So we've
But
we've made our indicators of compromise known, and we will continue to make our indicators of compromise known. But if you match the two, the one that you see in the announcement versus the one that we have now, they don't match 100%.
yeah, and that's
And
another
so where
thing
there are
too.
gaps, we have to
Yeah.
do something.
We've seen, like Evan was getting at, I think this was kind of led in the beginning, like UNC 1878. I think they are heavily involved in a lot of those ransom attacks, but we've seen different variants used right now, targeting supply chain, medical manufacturers, shippers, as well as, hospitals, as, that whole chain from beginning to end. And it seems like if you're involved in the medical sector in any of those facets right now, you may be targeted at some point. And what I am seeing right now from my own intel is that it's not uniform attacks. We have seen the same attacker presence in multiple incidents, but we have seen other attackers that are at play right now. And so I think that's a big story too, right? Going back to, there may be this new imminent threat, and maybe there is UNC 1878 targeting a number of facilities, but it doesn't mean that's the only one that's out there targeting. There's a lot of factors at play. And I think there's a little risk, right, in focusing too much on one APT, advanced persistent threat, because if you put your focus on that one threat and you get tunnel vision, it's kind of a panicked response, like Kevin was talking about, then you're going to miss the things around you and the techniques that may be used by other adversarial groups targeting the healthcare sector for these financially driven campaigns. And so I think that's our goal, is to not focus on this with a microscope, but look at it from a macro analysis instead of a micro analysis, to make sure we're prepared and we're giving you all the information we can, right?
Well, that's it, right? It's trying to be transparent with people so that you can address. There are times to be fearful. There are times to be, I don't know if there's a time to panic, but these are things that really we need to be paying attention to, and we need to do a much better job of sharing information with everybody, right? When you look at, if you look, the indicators of compromise that were shared by CISA, the indicators of compromise that were shared by Mandiant, the indicators of compromise that were shared by us, and many, many others, there's, there's no confidential data there. You can see what an indicator of compromise looks like, and you can see how important that intel is to another incident responder, or somebody who's, charged with protecting the healthcare organization.
Yep.
Really important stuff.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So what we know to be true is there are active ransomware attacks. In terms of, are they ransomware attacks? Do they seem to be more frequent right now? I think in healthcare they are more frequent, based on what we're seeing.
Yep.
You and I had a discussion earlier this week about, UNC 1878. It was, I think, March when they said they were going to stop targeting healthcare.
Yeah. So that was really interesting, and some of this came from Mandiant's data they put out, which was great. It was good for the community. But we know around the time that COVID became a pandemic and we were really being impacted, there was kind of a global truce that some ransomware groups put out, saying, "Hey, we're not going to pressure healthcare right now." And during that time, we did see a significant drop in ransom throughout healthcare, and I'm thankful for that. This particular APT, UNC 1878, around that same time, they went pretty much dark for close to 6 months. And then September-ish, they veered their head again and started targeting healthcare sector and ransoming medical centers. And since that, we've seen them steadily ramp up March into October. And so, like we talked about before, it begs the question to me, what were they doing during those 6 months, right? And that's one very important thing that we constantly learn in these incidents, is that, we did share some dwell times and stuff like that, but the dwell times are really all over the place. I've worked a lot of incidents too, where we've seen dwell times that could have been, some over a year, some close to 2 years, meaning attackers there, and they're just waiting for an opportune time. And so we can say there is a pattern right now that our attackers see this as an opportune time because the frequency of those attacks are increasing. I think that is factual. And so I have a lot of theories. I don't know. I want to share all my theories with what they may have been doing for the last 6 months. But I think there's a lot of smart people who could figure out their own theories here and start to understand some of these patterns and maybe the truths. I mean, we're talking about criminal enterprise here was a ruse so that folks would put their guard down, feel a little bit of a safety net while we were focusing our attentions on more important things during the time, which is lives. And during that time, they took that opportunity to essentially try to sneak in the back door, lay low, and wait for an opportunity to present itself, and then essentially begin that next stage in their exploit, which is ransom.
Right. And John, says, this webinar is not providing the details. We would want to make sure we are putting ourselves in the best security posture. And we did share the information. If you go to, the website that probably led you to log in here, that's some of the information we have in terms of IOCs. And also at the bottom of that page are links to other IOCs that should help you. And there's the link.
I don't mind either, Evan. If you want, I'll divulge here. And I'm assuming we're going to get to that eventually anyway. I don't want to go through the full IOC list.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so here's the big things to know right now. Ryuk's hot, and that's the news stories. They were referring to these Ryuk ransom events. Ryuk is right now, those news stories are mostly focused on UNC 1878, which is an APT. The one thing that's likely most always consistent with Ryuk is a very high percentage of these cases start with a phish. Typically, they're going to contain a Word doc with embedded macros and code that'll execute the first payload. We have seen variations of that. It can be a malicious link that someone navigates to. It can be a PDF file with an embedded malicious link. We've even seen some new tactics where they're actually sending valid OneNotes from another compromised entity to your entity, linking to a legit Microsoft site that you'll log into. And then once you're in that other compromised entity's OneNote, there's a link there embedded in that OneNote file that deploys the initial payload. UNC 1878 is a little different than the other APTs we've seen before because they're not using Emotet in their attack chain, and that's something too in the news, they're focusing on that, UNC 1878, but I see a lot of other Ryuk attackers that do use Emotet in their attack chain. So typically after the phish, it's either going to be Emotet that's deployed or TrickBot, QuackBot. Even if Emotet is deployed, the next step is TrickBot and QuackBot. Once TrickBot and QuackBot are deployed, UNC 1878 actually is deploying Cobalt Strike C2 framework, which is a command and control framework that essentially gives attackers hands on the keyboard from wherever they're at in the world. Once they are at that point, they are inside your network, they have full visibility, and they begin their process of escalating privileges. So they target the domain, see if the domain is vulnerable, and try to harvest access data. If they can't harvest that way, they target specific users of power by enumerating the domain, looking for domain admin user credentials. They will get to domain admin. Once they get to the domain admin, then they spend a lot of time enumerating your network. They identify all your live hosts, where those hosts live, and what those hosts contain. They probably know more about your own system inventory and your own data inventory than you do. They're going to identify which servers have private information, which servers have the information that you require for your business to run. On top of that, they're going to identify your entire backup structure, where your backups live, the rotation level of your backups, and more importantly, how to destruct those backups. The next phase of the attack then leads into the destruction of backups. They will first completely destroy all backups that are online. At that point, and then they move to volume shadow copies to ensure there's no volume shadows or snaps to restore from. And then the ransomware event is engaged. Ransomware is typically pretty quick for these guys. We've tested some variants in our lab this week that can encrypt the workstation in about a minute. Now, obviously, those numbers change depending upon the amount of data that's on those systems, but their encryption algorithms and methods are getting faster. At that point, that's the end of the attack. You'll receive a ransom note on your system. that will essentially engage, give you engagement instructions to engage your attacker if you want to negotiate. People want to know what's the biggest thing that you can do to protect. The one thing that everyone on the call should do and make sure you are doing is ensure first you have good backups. Those backups are usable and they're restorable. And then further, get your backups off the network. Make sure you are developing a plan for offsite storage of backups, offline storage of backups, something to air gap those backups. The most important thing is if they can't hit your backups on the network, if you've got them on tapes or disks in a vault, they can't be destructed by the attackers. You will have the ability to recover, and you won't have to continue to fund these terrorist organizations. And that's the 30-second rundown of where we are. We have a full list that we have shared with everyone. I'd urge you guys to look at it. It includes all those things, along with a lot of the other tools that we're seeing as part of this attack chain, because they use various tools to harvest your domain, those credentials to enumerate your domain, and so on. They use typical naming structures for their files. We've included that. They like to put files in specific locations. We've included all that. We've compiled through multiple sources, a few dumps we share with you of all the domains, all the IPs that are known to be contacted as part of this attack chain and use to deliver. So I urge you guys to look at that. That's something that we don't plan to be static. We want to continue to update this. I know Evan is working on some things right now so we can have a more streamlined way to get this information to you guys. But yeah, I mean, that's where we are, and that's the 10,000-foot view. I do see someone says go to the cloud. The cloud is a good solution for backups, but if you have connectivity to that cloud from your network and the attackers identify that, they will target your cloud too. So we can't put a false sense of security into having those cloud backups. I've seen cloud environments completely destructed as part of these processes too. So it's ensuring you have proper segmentations, protections around those things, and really understand the attack. I will say a big thing to look out for that everyone should be watching for today. We typically see base 64 encoded commands used throughout the attack chain. If you're seeing base 64 encoded commands used in your environment, don't ignore those. Investigate those, and if you don't know how, find someone who can reverse those and figure out what's going on. But that's another fingerprint that these attackers are almost uniformly using right now. So
Good. No, that's a good rundown. And yeah, there's a lot more to these attacks because you didn't even go into the tools, all the tools that are used. I mean, there's a whole slew of tools that could potentially be leveraged by the attacker, and they'll transfer those tools themselves into your environment and then use those tools in your environment.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we see valid tools like sysinternals tools, things that sysadmins use. Often we'll be using these attacker toolkit too. So it's a good way to masquerade and hide, blend in with the shadows so no one notices you're there. Really, it goes back to, having a good whitelist for your applications, understanding what's in use in your environment. And when you see anomalies, just checking those anomalies out. Sometimes you're going to find it's just some really smart guy trying out some fun tools and maybe work on a project to make your business better. Sometimes you're going to find someone says, I have no idea why that's running here. That wasn't me. And and then you'll know. But it's always worth a check because assuming things, again, like Evan mentioned before, is always our biggest fault here. Assuming we know things and not really given the time to look into these things that are anomalies.
It's funny, the attack sequence that you call out is the same exact attack sequence that has always been used.
Mm-hmm.
Even, I mean, the thing that people are looking for, it seems like, is a silver bullet, an easy button. These are basic, fundamental information security concepts that should have already been in your environment. If they're not, get them in as soon as possible. Backing up data and backing up your data and then protecting those backups. Right? It's your last line of defense. If we have a company right now, their backups are also hit. And what do?
Yeah.
You try to negotiate with the attacker. And in this case, the attacker's gone dark. So you can't even negotiate. Now what?
It's heartbreaking. I mean, it really is. I don't sleep good because of these things. And it's because we do care. I don't want anyone to be in this situation. And I think that's why Evan and I wanted to be here today to talk through some of these things, try to give you guys facts, guidance, and understand. And this is nothing new. I mean, that report's new, but what we're looking at here is nothing new. Even though the frequency has increased, like Evan said, it's the same stuff we've been seeing all year this year. It's the same stuff we've seen before. And really, if we can apply those basic security principles that we all know, we can beat these guys. We can prevent these things from happening. It's tough, but we got to do the basics.
Well, and as you were talking through the attack sequence, I had flashbacks to the Target breach of 2013. That's 7 years ago now. And it wasn't a ransomware attack, but the attack sequence was the same. Find a vulnerability, compromise the vulnerability so that you get a foothold into the system. In this case, it might be malware. It might be a phishing attack where we get credentials to, whatever. You get a foothold into the system. The next step is typically to elevate your privileges, right? Or pivot, right? Elevate your privileges, pivot, plant the back door. All those things are still in play. And every single one of those things is detectable, right? Yep. There was a, one of the people attending said, have proper application whitelisting. Or, now you may call that default deny or trust, which goes a little further, whatever. Yeah. The thing is, when we set up environments, and it's always been an issue, it's always been a problem. We set up environments, anything can run. And then we try to lock down. So you go from a default allow and try to pull back, right? Rather than going a default deny and only allow. And that's the right approach. Now, most people, and probably everybody on the call, went the traditional approach, right? Which is not a secure approach. It's an IT approach, right? And same thing with egress filtering. All these command and control, you would be able to see these command and control communications taking place had you followed a default. Lock down everything, only open up what you need. I mean, that's one way that you would start catching these things a hell of a lot sooner. And then what would your response be? Because really, it's the same sequence too. It's basics, fundamentals, security stuff, right? You try to prevent as much as possible. What you can't prevent, what do you have in place to detect? Once you detect, what's your response? Yep. Play that out yourself, right? What's your own little APT?
Yep. Yeah, I think too, an important thing is to make sure people understand what detect really means, right? And if we talk about detection here, I think, and I'm not, a lot of people default to like antivirus detection, right? And my signature-based detections and things like that. And I think what we're getting into here too is there's more than just relying on that one or two tools that you think is going to be the silver bullet in your environment, because there's a lot more to it than that. But you can still build a very strong detection program through like having a good SIEM and being able to correlate your event logs into one situation. And people always say, but there's so much. How do I do this? It's by establishing your baseline in the beginning, establishing a level of normalcy so you can determine what is normal. You can really identify over time the way your environment should react and the way the events your environment should log and create, and then having the ability to detect anomalies that are relevant to your environment. There's going to be standard anomalies that are relevant to everyone. Like if you see a large number of logon failures, right? If you see a large number of connections to one system from another system that aren't typically there. There's a lot of things that are going to be easily identifiable if you just have the data and you have someone dedicated to reviewing that data so you can develop those baselines and understand what normalcy is before an event happens, so that when the event does happen, it becomes almost trivial to identify that event's going on and then begin to react to it. We could talk through so many scenarios where that's applicable, right? Having a baseline on your basic ingress and egress data for an organization, knowing how much data typically goes in your organization and out of your organization at any given time. Once you understand that baseline, if you see a spike in data filtering into your environment or leaving your environment, that's an alert. That's detectable. Then you investigate that detection to see, hey, what's causing that? Is this an Eastern European Federation trucking my data out the back door while I'm asleep at night? Or is this just Jim implemented a new cloud backup service and I was unaware of that? But either way, you're going to be in tune and know what's happening in your environment. You're going to be able to react to those things. Yeah, I think it's covering, and it's still covering the basics. I'm not talking about anything that's it's sophisticated in any way here. It's just being able to have the data, look at the data, and understand the importance of that there's manual calibration in these things, and there's no silver bullet. I wish there was. If there was a silver bullet, I'd get more sleep. My team would get more sleep, and we're looking for it. So if anybody finds that silver bullet, you let me know too, because I don't think it's out there.
Well, and logically, I mean, if you use logic, it can't be.
Right. Yeah, it can't.
Right. It is going to take a human being behind the keyboard to practice good practices. It's going to take a combination of things, right? Fundamental information security practices. Like you mentioned, the attacker knows your environment better than you do. Right. That's asset management. How in the world would you ever expect yourself to protect the things you have?
Yep.
Right. So if you're, focusing on, let's say ingress traffic, right, on the firewall, and that's going to be your thing, right? I'm only going to allow in stuff that I know, but you don't know the things that you're even trying to protect. How will you know if you're actually protecting the things behind the firewall?
Right.
The same, there was another question here about, do you suggest default deny on firewall policies? Yes. Absolutely. If you can do it, do it. A lot of times it's easier to do it, and it's almost easier to rebuild an environment from scratch than it is to change an existing environment to a default deny posture, because something insecure at the core will always be insecure. It's nearly impossible sometimes. But that's where eventually we need to go. Otherwise, we continue this same discussion. The same discussion happens over and over again. It's almost like Groundhog Day. Right? Back up your data. Oh, okay. Protect those backups. Okay. But yet, time and time again on incident responses, you go and ask it, and find out that they don't have backups, or the backups have already been ransomed. They didn't protect them. And in some case, I mean, I've told clients, do you have a back storage room where you save your DLT tape library? Go get that thing. Right? Because when you write it to your tape, it's a worm, so it's off the network.
Yep.
Essentially.
Yep.
So yeah, same stuff. Here we are. So one of the questions is, aren't they using, lots of questions now. Aren't they using port 80 and 443 default? Deny may not be useful. Well, but the traffic is going from some to somewhere. So the ports that they're using is only one indicator of the actual traffic pattern, right? So you wouldn't just block ports. You wouldn't just block globally 8443 outbound. You'd block 80 and 443 outbound to everybody except for the people you're supposed to be talking to on 80 and 443. Right. And that's difficult because we're using the internet for all sorts of things all the time, all sorts of communications. People are signing up for new cloud services without you knowing. I mean, all this stuff is happening in the business. The best way to protect yourself is to know yourself intimately. Should that stuff be happening? Do we need to change the behaviors so that we can actually get our hands around what traffic is legit and what traffic isn't? Yep. Just expecting your DLP solution, to inspect traffic and tell you that information, it'll work, it'll help, but it's not going to be that silver bullet.
Yep. Yeah. And I do want to make a point there too. Just so people are aware, like a lot of the information we put in those IOCs are unique things. I've seen someone had mentioned, like, the Let's Encrypt certs on port 80. We're seeing them on 443. Yeah, they're going to exist on 443 too, but 80 is an anomaly. When we go back to identifying those anomalies that could be relevant. So I wanted to include there. I've seen someone else, here, like going back to Evan's question with the 80 and 443. There are other ports that can be used here for these beacons and the frameworks as well. We see DNS. We know typically we've heard reports right now that UNC 1878 and some of the other Ryuk attackers are using a framework known as Anchor. Anchor is very similar to like a Cobalt Strike. It's a C2. It's just more embedded into one package, but it relies on DNS communications. And So, you can't just limit that scope, like he was saying, to those ports. And typically too, once they're able to establish the beacon activity, they're going to migrate to another port. It's not going to be one of those standards that's going to look like a dynamic. If you guys are aware of dynamic ports, it's a huge range of ports. And so they then further masquerade that traffic and hide it in that dynamic port range. And so it's difficult to pull out of there. But again, going back to like the DNS, for example, there are ways that you can identify those anomalies. If you have DNS beacons on your network and you do have DNS logging enabled, then you're going to see a significant increase in DNS responses into your network, because that's how that command team server is going to be sending commands to the internal network to say, here's what you do next, here's your next step. And so that's distributed through essentially a large volume of DNS response packets sent to that compromised host. And it goes back again, like I was talking about with the base 64 encoding. It's going to be base 64 encoded. It's not going to be in one packet, because a DNS packet can't hold all that. It's going to be in 50 to 100 or more packets, and it'll be chunked to base 64 that then that infected box receives, compiles all those packets together, executes that encoded command, and then that's the next step of whatever the attack is at that point. So don't stick to just saying these are the only things. Use your common logic there as well. And the other thing that, Evan and I've talked about so much is, even though these attackers are using the old tried and true methods they've been using for years, they're still pretty smart. Not all of them, but so most of them are pretty smart. And so they're really good at evasion and like tweaking these things. Like the IP list and the domain list you'll see out there, and we've shared those. Those are temporary. As soon as those are burned, it's just like anyone else that, is doing any sort of private work. When you are burned, you move on, you find somewhere else, and they do that. The same thing goes with the typical hash-based approach, which is what most folks' antivirus is using. They use hashes, which are fingerprints of packages to identify them. Well, the attackers are smart. They know they're getting picked up. So what do? They add a bit, they add a bot inside that package, and it completely changes the hash, and it's no longer detectable. And so those are a very short-lived thing. We see that in this situation too, in ransom in general. And this isn't just our imminent threat. This is ransom in general. Those attackers will continually update and modify those tools, very minor things, so that the signatures no longer apply. And that's why we go back to more of a threat-based intelligence based upon actions in your environment that are normal and those that aren't normal, and why that baseline is so important in understanding that, so you can see those anomalies and be able to detect outside of the signature-based approach, which is a standard IPS or an antivirus engine. And so it sounds harder than it is, but it really is just having those event log monitors set up, and if you see boxes communicating that shouldn't be, you check that out. If you see a ton of failed logins, you check that out. If you see RDP blast overnight while all your guys are asleep, something's wrong. You need to check that out. And so,
well, that's it, man. I mean, computers only do what you tell them to do.
Yeah.
So if the computer is doing something that it didn't do before, something told it to do it.
Yep.
Either a user told it to do it, a program told it to do it, whatever. So those anomalies become super important, right? And we're all busy, all the time doing all kinds of stuff. But the more intimately you know something, the better you're going to be at protecting it.
Yep,
so
sure.
knowing your environment intimately, right? Every application, every server, and I know people get, well, that's just such. That's an indicator that your environment is overcomplicated. Bruce Schneier said it, a while back. Complexity is the worst enemy. So if it is too difficult for you to get your head around, or get your hands around, or get the technology to tell you intimately what it is you're dealing with, to get the baselines that, like Oscar's saying, look for ways maybe that you can simplify your environment more.
Yep.
Because it gets to a point where things become so complex in your environment that you're fighting a losing battle, right? And the thing is, things continue to get more complex faster than we're able to secure them. So the problem just gets worse and worse and worse. So that's another reason why the 427 was so much concern for me, because it's 100% feasible.
Mhm.
Did it happen? I don't think so. I think this more hype, to be honest, because I just don't see any correlation. But again, that's speculation. In your mind, can you separate speculation from fact? Right? There's another good question here about, and I think it's a good, will a compromised phishing user notice anything on their system if they do click on an attachment or link? What do you think?
Most cases, no. Most cases, that user who's affected isn't going to know. They're going to know anything. It's going to be pretty quiet. The hyper observant one may notice a blip as a code executes or initiates. Not always, even a lot of the time it's hidden. Most of the time it's going to be hidden and quiet. And so, yeah, end users likely not going to see anything. They're going to be completely unaware. And, like when we do offensive testing as well, and we are sitting on people's workstations all day long on the penetration testing side, and no one knows we're there. So yeah, they're not going to know. It's going to be up to your security team or your IT team, those security professionals who are watching for those anomalies we talked about before. Big thing there, though,
question.
right?
Can you,
if go back to, is phishing is so important, and you guys, I know you hear this over and over, but your end users are so important. And developing a culture where you can do exercises to test your business and your clients and your employees, and how vulnerable are they to these types of attacks, and understanding that, first of all, is good. Educating those users is even more important. Doing those exercises without any sort of shame is critically important. But more so, just making sure that your end users know you're not going to get in trouble. Everybody makes a mistake. Everybody gets phished. We see it all the time. But if you're afraid something didn't act the way you thought it should when you were interacting, or you weren't expecting this email, report that. And there's not going to be repercussions. We need to be transparent with each other, and we need to teach our own that it's important to be transparent. There's no shaming. There's no judgment. There's no repercussions. This is all about protecting our businesses and our people.
one of the questions I get a lot is, how effective is MFA? Again, how effective is it in preventing ransomware?
It's very effective in its own. And now, to say it's very effective in preventing ransomware, they're kind of two different things here, mm-hmm. right? So MFA is very effective at preventing or protecting the systems that MFA is applied to. And I did see the question about PowerShell, no way that I'm aware of. And most of someone had asked, can you apply MFA to PowerShell? Like, you have to run MFA to run PowerShell. I'm not aware of that. And even more so, our attackers typically get to a super user, and a lot of times they even pivot to system, and they'll run commands as system. And so if you get system, you're operating as root. And at that point, even if you had MFA controls on, it's not going to apply to system. It can't, or it would break the system at that point. But back to that original question, I think MFA is important in preventing access to, your publicly accessible systems, your VPNs, your applications, your email systems, and things like that. And we see these attacks too do sometimes originate from a vulnerable VPN. And when I say a vulnerable VPN, it can be that vulnerabilities exist in that particular image that's applied to your VPN device. It's also people that have single factor on their VPN, and even more so, that VPN's tied to Active Directory and it has a direct connection to your Active Directory. And so, we see it all the time. If you have single factor VPN, it's going to get popped. If you have single factor VPN, there's a good chance they're already in there or have been in there. Go check it when we're done. Look at those logs and make sure someone from Eastern Europe isn't logging into it. If they are, call somebody. And it's just, and we do it all the time to people when we're testing on the offensive side. If we see one of our clients that has a VPN that's open, it's not that hard, given enough time, to gain access to that VPN. We're humans. We have patterns. We have similarities, and we apply that psychology the same way that attackers do, to know that right now, October 2020 ! Is a really popular password. And you'd be surprised at how consistent that is within humans across multiple organizations across our entire country. There's no discrimination there. It's October 2020 for everyone. And so it goes back again, right, to put the MFA on anything you got publicly accessible. Just do that. Second, educate your people and continue to focus on your people and making sure they understand those things about reporting a fishy email, and they understand those things about creating a secure password. And that'll lower your likelihood of impact dramatically.
Yeah, and you know, your backups, and I know that there's always exceptions to the rules. Another thing that we get caught up in is, well, okay, great, but what about this attack? What about that attack? You're never going to stop all the attacks. This isn't about risk elimination. That's not possible. What we need to focus on as information security professionals is risk management, a different thing. So what avenues are the most likely for attackers to get into my environment, and then how do I limit the impact of those, of whatever, right? That's what risk is: likelihood and impact. So likely ways into your environment are phishing. Likely ways into your environment are single factor authentication on anything that's on the internet. Like you said, it's going to get popped if it hasn't already. I'd be surprised if it hasn't, to be honest. And so those are the most likely ways into the environment. And have, you know, IOCs, what happens when that happens, you know, when they're there, if you want to break the attack sequence. But then what do we do to limit the impact, right? The other part of risk. When you're talking about ransomware, the number one thing is backups. That's why I swear when you mention backups, people's eyes roll. They're like, yeah, I know. Do it. You know what I mean? Because if everybody said, oh, I know, we wouldn't be seeing the things that we see over and over again, right? So go validate that your backups are actually working. Validate that they're offline. You know, I know it's the non-sexy part of information security is the basics and fundamentals, but that's where you find 90% of your risk.
Yep.
So if you want to do the things like now, go take care of those things. Backups, you know, whatever you can do for training for your users on phishing, get, you know, multi-factor authentication on everything, and get to know your environment really deeply and really well. Get that baseline, figure out what that is, figure out what applications you have in your environment, which ones are valid, which ones are not. When you talk about asset inventory, hardware asset inventory, software asset inventory, and data asset inventory. It comes in three forms. So it's not in accounting. If you're thinking accounting is taking care of it for you, that's not what I'm talking about. They may have semblance of a hardware asset inventory. Unlikely they're going to have a software asset inventory, because chances are pretty good that your users are buying software all the time that you don't even know about. And then where's your data? So time and time again, you talk to customers and you say, well, what, you know, what application, just ask for simple, do you have an application asset inventory? No, most times they don't. Or they tell you, well, you know, I think we have about 200 applications in our environment. About isn't good enough. You know what I mean? The attacker, or if they're in your environment, they know exactly how many applications you have in your environment. You have the about. It's your job to know what, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So
1000%. Yeah, I do want to respond. I see William put a note up there talking about the MFA too. Well, I'm not saying again it's a silver bullet, because as I said before, the silver bullet does not exist. Everything is hackable, and if it's not, it will be hackable at some point. We're playing percentage games here, right? And we're lowering likelihood and reducing the possibility of impact. And attackers are like, I mean, they're humans. They're just like us. And so let's think about some just basic psychology again. Do they want to target hard targets or soft targets? Soft targets. We all have money. They're financially driven primarily. Soft targets have money the same way hard targets have money. And so if you can put some of those barriers of entry onto your protected systems, even if they may be exploitable, your likelihood of impact is reduced dramatically by doing that. But I do agree, you know, like William said, you know, MFA isn't a silver bullet. There are multiple techniques that can be used to defeat that. But it becomes a much greater challenge to defeat those logon systems if you have that in place. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's a key point, right? There's never been a silver bullet. There never will be a silver bullet. There'll always be a way to get into something.
For sure.
That's the way life is. That's the way the world works. We're trying to protect from, the most likely ways and the ones that would hurt me the most. The same way I protect my family, right? When I go get
Yep.
in my car to go to to
Mhm.
go to the store, I can't guarantee you I'm not going to get in an accident. I'm not going to die on the way to the store, but I take proper precautions, right? I put my seatbelt on. I know how to drive my car. I know how my car operates. I know when it's running different than, if it's running a little rough, right? I know if it's a little bit, bouncier, maybe I've got a flat tire or something. You know your car intimately. We're just using the same things, with computers.
Mhm.
How well we rush so fast and we use all these things and we don't take proper precautions because we don't even understand what it is we're using.
Mhm. Yep.
So,
1,000%.
and that's kind of how we need to start treating these things is I can't guarantee that bad things aren't going to happen, as they will happen. So, what am I doing to try to prevent those things?
Yep. Sure.
All right. So back to real quick, because we are running over and I do appreciate it who stayed with us this long. Um, what you see from our perspective, what you see CISA announcing is legit and you should read it. You should understand it. You should know what it says. Also, the thing that we published, our IOCs and our guidance online is also something that you should, peruse and understand. I don't think I have seen no credible information myself, nor has anybody that I've reached out to, assuming that they're telling me the truth, uh, that there are 427 or 428 hospitals that are going to be hit anytime soon. Not to say that not either. I have no credible information one way or the other.
Yeah. I think the way that we both feel about this is the threat is there. It's always been there though. And we're just, we're not sure if that 427 is real or not, but I can say one thing, maybe it is good because it had over 200 of you all here listen to us today because you're thinking about it. And if there's any takeaway, hopefully some of the information we gave to you, you can apply. So if you are targeted, period. And this isn't a one-time exercise. If this is real or it's not real, it doesn't matter if you're hit or you're not now because you will become a target eventually. And you got to prepare now regardless. And so I think that's the biggest message I want to send is let's don't treat these things as static exercises that are one-time events. Let's treat these things as ongoing exercises and do the right things so we can protect our businesses, our people, our clients. I mean, and there's people's lives always at risk if you're in medical. We all know that. And so we want to arm you with knowledge so you can understand uh, what you can do, not just now, but ongoing.
Right. Well, and I'm told that we've got till 1:30 actually, so we can keep talking as long as people keep listening. And you're being nice to us. You're not calling us names and stuff like that because that'll leave us. We'll leave for that too.
They may
So,
have. We might have just missed it already. It's buried in there somewhere.
right, it's us. That's what we deal with. Hey, one of the questions is, do we know a count of providers who have been hit so far, seemingly related to this spree?
Mhm.
I don't. I have essentially the same info. That's one of our issues in our industry is we still aren't sharing information as well as we can. I know one. I don't even maybe off the top of my head, 14 maybe.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they're all related to the spree. Meaning, when you say related to the spree, you mean is it recent? Yeah, these 14 are recent. Is there a correlation between the attacks indicating it's the same attacker or same group? No, I don't have that.
Yeah, same thing to me. I
Do you?
don't. Yeah, I don't have any real count on that. I could estimate somewhere in the same ballpark you just said of entities I've actually interacted with and know about. But again, like you said there too, it's we've seen variations between those entities, and it looks like there's more than one APT.
Right. Which which was one of the concerns I brought up to Homeland Security, when they shared and made their announcement, it was great. Your IOCs don't match in these areas. And if the 427 is legit, that number is credible, which something was there that was credible enough for you to make an announcement. And I don't know if they jumped the gun. I mean, I don't know. There's not enough information in background behind that. You have Krebs who wrote his post. It says that he's been looking at this since Monday, blah, blah, blah. And I know that Krebs was on the phone with Homeland Security more than once. He actually left a meeting to go call himself, which is weird. That's just a whole different thing. So is there correlation between them? If we're seeing parts of our IOCs that are similar and parts that aren't, and we've seen an increase in healthcare entities getting hit, do we have coordination again? Do we have coordination from multiple groups that we don't know about? And I don't know that answer. That's again speculation, but it's something that I think we really need to hunt down.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's knowledge I think we all want. And I know there's a lot of us who are researching diligently to try to get more answers pertaining to that. I think in due time, some of those things will present themselves. But like you said, we're about facts here and being transparent. And until we have facts and are transparent, I'm going to leave it as, I don't know, but it's certainly a possibility. And I certainly know that there's multiple threat actors that are ransoming people today, but there was multiple threat actors ransoming 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And guess what? There's going to be multiple for the foreseeable future. And then you throw in ransomware as a service in there. And if anyone doesn't know what that is, take 10 minutes after this and look it up, because it's a whole new ballgame.
Well, and we saw that week too, right? We saw, what was it? Globe Imposter in the wild, one of our incidents.
Yeah. And that's a RAS, like the 30-second for people is, hey, if you're a hacker and you want to become part of our sweet ransomware company, apply, you get approved. We'll give you our ransomware kit. You go deploy it and we'll give you a big piece of that ransomware. So they're literally starting legitimate like businesses that are complete criminal organizations and have a very appealing method to recruit talented young folks with cybersecurity skills. Now, I will say a lot of those are limited. You have to speak a specific language or be from a specific geographic area for those services today. I won't do that right now, but yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Well, that's what, and again, man, that's the frustrating part from, and one of the things now we're doing fly on the wall kind of talk, which I like anyway, because I learn a lot from you, and I think it's just good. One of the, there's a number of concerns that I have on a more macro level. One of those concerns is the attackers are still moving much faster than we are. Despite how awesome we think we are, and we are awesome, man. I mean, there's great people in this industry, but despite how awesome we think we are and how smart we are and how my poop doesn't stink kind of people, the attackers are moving faster than you. They're moving faster than all of us. We're implementing more and more technology faster than we can secure it. The gap is getting wider. The reason why attackers are using ransomware isn't because it's the only thing that they can use. They're using ransomware because it's the highest return on their investment right now. Yep. If you've been in this industry long enough, prior to ransomware, the biggest return on their investment was stealing credit card and debit card data. Right? That's why you have huge, breaches, the Target breach with 70 million, Home Depot. I mean, on and on. There was just so many hits there. Well, then we made it a little more difficult for them. We put in some simple controls, almost sort of a silver bullet, but not it really, because those attacks can still be carried out. It's more work for the attacker.
Yep. And we saw
so there was no silver.
When they had all the credit cards too, another thing, they saturated the market and the value of a credit card plummeted. Right. I mean, you could literally buy credit cards for like $5. So they weren't making money on that anymore. They had to figure out a new way to make money. You think about too, how long does it take to exfil data versus burn it down? And I'm not saying these attackers don't exfil. Some do, some don't. And that's, part of all of our investigations. But the ones that we see that don't exfiltrate data, they like to get in, enumerate as fast as they can, have a minimum dwell time, and then burn it down and leave. It's just quicker money. And, you know, it's a rather lucrative business right now for these people who I can't accurately describe because I'm not allowed to use the words on this call.
Right.
Yeah.
But they run themselves like a business. They've been running themselves like a business for a while now, and we still don't treat them like that. We still don't think of them as this is a business,
Yeah.
right? And in any business, if you're a business person, you do what's my greatest return on investment? How am I going to make the most amount of money with the least amount of expense, whether it be time, you know, whatever. And so right now it's ransomware. It's very easy to deploy. They can automate most of it. They can control it from, you know, centralized locations, and they're making a boatload of money, you know, doing it. So you have to disrupt that chain somewhere. Now, taking this understanding and then applying it to the number 427. You know, if there are 427 hospitals that were actually part of this, and I was the attacker, and I don't crap about morals. I don't give a crap about, you know, I mean, they're not moral people, right? They just don't care. And it was funny how we kind of bought into the, you know, 78 when they said back in March they were going to stop targeting hospitals. It's like, okay, you're so nice. Thanks for buddies.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, bud.
But yeah, see, they're not so bad. But so if I were the attacker and I was at the switch and I had no morals and I wanted the biggest return on my investment, I would just flip the switch.
Yep.
I would just hit 427 hospitals. You even if you knew about it, big deal. I just flipped a switch. And so you'd have 427 hospitals right now that would down in some form or another, or dealing with a ransomware attack. A good percentage of those would not be prepared to bring their systems back up again quickly. Ransoms have increased significantly. You know, the FBI was throwing around a number of $10 million. So let's say half of them can't recover quick enough, and they may not have the $10 million. But if you caused a big enough disruption, wouldn't the government just step in and pay it for you?
I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know. But as you play this stuff out and you start using like logic, and again, all speculation, but if I was sitting at the button with the 427 and I had no morals and I was one of these, again, I can't use the bad words either. You just push the button.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's just a lot of things that, you know, when you use all the speculation, you try to play out all the potential scenarios and understanding that it is only speculation. That doesn't mean you don't continue to try to hunt down the 427.
Yeah.
But I don't have any information about the 427. There's missed.
And you know, it's important too, right? I mean, we've seen that comment that initiated this whole thing, right? And I don't think we can even read that comment here because of language and specifics. But the comment by the threat that was made, initiating that number, and to me, and this is again getting into the psychology, it's of humans. There's a little ego behind that, right? Did you catch that? Like, let's wait and see
it was
when we do this, you know? And so it led me to believe, I mean, again, hackers are people just like us. They have egos. They're trying to prove something to someone. They're trying to do something to make people think or react in a certain way. And they got a reaction. That's why we're all here right now. There is a reaction. But if you had that power, isn't it a little reckless to make an egotistical comment like that could be retrieved in a public forum? Would you tell someone that you're going to sneak in the middle of the night and burglarize their house? No. So why would they say that? And to me, it again questions the validity.
Yeah. Well, and one of my big concerns, and you know, we had talked about this as the team, if there is a 427 number, tread lightly. We don't want to do is in our incident response, tip off the attacker that we're onto them, and then they start to panic themselves and flip the switch on the other 400 some odd. You know what I mean? So it was interesting. Now, one of the things that became, you know, obviously apparent, I mean, just so obvious for us on defense as a country is how ill prepared we are. If there was an actual switch and the switch was flipped. And I say that because the people that I talked to were surprised, you know, like,
Yeah.
you have what? Yeah, give me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I was hoping that you could give me information. I don't know.
Yep.
So, and that's part of the plan that I think we need to put together. We owe it to ourselves. And, I talked about it last night on our show. I talked to you about it. How do we, band together as a community, put our egos aside for a little bit and come up with a solution to put us in a much better position.
Mm-hmm.
Um, waiting 3-4 days to try to get some IOCs that are anything.
Yep.
In
Yeah,
3 days, the world.
Yeah, there's got to be a faster way to be able to just have communication between the community. Not try to profit off of this either. No one should be charging for this information. It should be free, open source. So I think we got some good stuff to work on, but
yeah, and we'll keep pushing forward on that. I mean, it's part of our mission is to do everything we can. So, all right. Anything else to add, man? Any parting words?
I don't know. Yeah, just it's been a crazy week for sure. It was good to get on here and chat with you about it, and hopefully we gave some value to people. Hopefully you learned something, or we were able to confirm something you thought, or got you thinking about something you weren't thinking before, or anything. I just hope there was value, and I just want everybody who's listening to know that we're a business, but we're in this to help people. That's why I'm here. That's why I, worked 60 plus hours already, at the end of the day yesterday. That's why my team's been doing the same thing. It's because we've been working our tails off just to make sure that we could get truth, real truthful information to be able to share with people. And we do hope you all take this serious. Like Evan said, don't panic, but take it serious and just do the right things and try to keep doing the right things. And it's a scary world out there, but we're going to get through it. We're all here together.
Yeah, that's great advice too. And I want people to know too that you can always reach out to us. Hopefully there are no lawyers on the call, but I've said this so many times. We don't work like lawyers. When you call us and ask questions and things like that, you're not going to get a bill for that, because we're not in this for the money. We're in this for the mission, right? It's always mission before money for us.
Mm-hmm.
It always will be. And so you will get some information, I think, after after this. One of those is called a risk registration, and all that means is you establish some communication with us as potentially your incident response, so that when an incident comes, we've already hit the ground running with you. We don't waste any time with that. That's another thing that people I think need help with. It's the incident happens. Who's the first call? Where do I go?
Yep.
Who do I trust? Having that kind of set aside, I think, helps people. And if you don't have it, if you don't want it with us, that's totally fine. Somebody get these things squared away, get these things ready so that when the ransomware hits, you know exactly where to go to get good information. So you'll get an email after that. Be safe.
I would say too, Evan, to
wear your masks.
Share this real quick. We've got the instant response plan template now. I know a lot of you probably don't even have a plan today. Get a plan. We put together a really, really good plan template to give away. That's something too we used to do as a service for people, and we said, hey, the community needs this. Let's give it to them. And so that's out there. We'll make sure that all the attendees get a link to that as well. So dig into that and start brushing up on your plan. It's another good free tool we have. So yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, wear your mask.
Yeah, wear your mask.
Wash your beards more too. You don't want to get those COVID germs in your beard.
Right. Well, and and in your instant response plan, please don't make your first call to be my cell phone.
Oh, so right.
Use Oscar's cell phone.
Yeah.
No.
No. All right.
All right.
All right. Thank you all.
Well, stay safe. Yeah. Thank you all. Take care.
See you guys.